الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ختم الأنبياء وإمام الأتقياء وقدوة الأصفياء وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. We are completing first the things that do not invalidate the prayer, and we're going to begin and then we're going to look at the things that are disliked in the prayer. So the author rahimahullah ta'ala says, فصل فيما لا يفسد الصلاة لو نظر المصلي إلى مكتوب وفهمه. If the one praying sees something written and understands it, this does not break the prayer. سواء كان قرآنا أو غيره, whether it's the Quran or other than it. قصد الاستفهام أو لا, whether one intended to understand or not. أساء الأدب, right? But this is إساءة أدب, this is poor manners, right? ولم تفسد الصلاة, but the prayer is not invalidated. لعدم النطق بالكلام, because one did not utter any speech, right? And this is, however, something to be avoided, which is why the sunnah is to pray in a place bereft of distractions, right? And why some of the early Muslims even deemed it makruh to decorate the mihrab, but the response was that no, if it's that if people pray according to the sunnah, which is looking down, they should not be able to see it, right? أو أكل ما بين أسنانه أو أكل ما بين أسنانه, or if one eats what is between their teeth, it does not break the prayer. وكان دون الحمصة, if it's less than the extent of a chickpea. بلا عمل الكثير, without excessive action. They didn't stick their finger in or anything by which the onlooker would think that, would be sure that they're not praying. كره ولا تفسد لعسر الاحتراز عنه. This is disliked. It'd be better to take it out from one's mouth and, right, either to ignore it, and if it distracts you, to take it out of one's mouth, but not in a manner that you throw it on the ground if you are especially if you're in a masjid or a respected place. But the best thing is just to ignore it. But swallowing it without need is somewhat disliked, but does not invalidate because it's hard to avoid. وإذا ابتلع ما ذاب من سكر في فمه فسدت. If one has a piece of sugar in one's mouth that melts like a block of sugar, then the prayer is invalidated because your phlegm will be, your saliva will be repeatedly affected by it, and if you swallow it on an ongoing basis, that's a lot. ولو ابتلعه أي السكر, if one swallows the sugar قبل الصلاة, before the prayer, ووجد حلاوته فيها لا تفسد, but then one found the sweetness of the sugar in the prayer, so you'd already swallowed it. This does not break the prayer. But the adab is, if you just ate, you rinse your mouth before, right? That's an adab, and it's recommended after eating, particularly, and recommended before the prayer to brush one's teeth, right? But neither is required. أو مر مار في موضع سجوده, or if a passerby pass by their place of prostration, لا تفسد. So if someone passes by their place of prayer, it does not break the prayer. A prohibition of something does not entail that the consequent action is, or the related action is invalid. If anything, the opposite, right? So the Prophet forbade a person passing in front of someone praying, and he gave permission to stop someone passing in front, but that does not entail that it invalidates the prayer, right? Because none of the meanings of invalidation are contained within it. The basis of invalidation prayer is amal kathir, is excessive action of the one praying. right? Or fawatu ruknin aw shart, or a condition or integral of the prayer being lifted. Shartin aw rukn, right? Omitting a condition or failing to fulfill an integral, right, etc. And none of those things are found. It doesn't invalidate the prayer. سواء المرأة والكلب والحمار, whether it be a woman or a dog or a donkey. And this has come in different hadiths. In the Arabic language, the waw does not indicate sharing of meanings between the things, but rather sharing of qualities between the things. Right? So there's not a comparison, right, between A, B, and C, but it's simply that A, B, and C share a ruling. And the ruling is and the meaning underlying is distraction. A person, if they're praying and someone of the opposite sex passes right in front of them, they might get distracted. If a dog comes close to you in prayer, you'll be distracted. If a donkey comes by, like, whoa, what's going on? Right? So it would distract. Right? So if Zubayr is praying, keep your donkey away from Zubayr because he might get distracted. A fortiori, let's say you pass behind the person, not in front of them, etc. Where possible. Right? But this is an important thing to note in the Arabic language. Like someone says, I want, and different languages differ. So you can't apply the rules of one language to another. If someone says, I'd like a cat and a pizza and a phone, is there any shared meaning between the cat, the pizza, and the phone? If you want a pizza, you're going to eat it. But does it mean you want to eat the cat? You'll be doing something haram. And of course, you're not going to eat your phone, right? They just share in the same ruling. I want A, B, and C. Right? Now, right. وَلَا يَقْطَعُ الصَّلَاةَ الشَّيْء لِقَوْلِهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم, nothing breaks the prayer. Nothing external to the prayer breaks it. إِدْرَأُوا مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. And nothing outside the prayer, meaning, and by nothing, this is a general statement by which something specific is meant, understood by the context, which is his being the inquiry regarding what if someone passes in front of one, and it's understood from the second part of the statement, إِدْرَأُوا مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Ward it off to the extent that you can. فَإِنَّمَا هُوَ الشَّيْطَانِ. Because someone passing by one is a shaitan. بِجَامِع is a shaitan, meaning like a shaitan is going to cause you distractions. Right? In that sense. They're not really a shaitan. If they do it deliberately, this is shaitan. Huh? Someone's praying. You're violating the sanctity of someone, right? Praying, right? وَإِنْ أَثِمَ الْمَارِ. Even if the one passing by would be sinful. This is in marra بموضع السجود وأمكنه غير ذلك دون مشقة. If they passed within the موضع السجود, within the place of prostration, and there's no hardship in going around. Okay? Some of the ulama made tafsil between different kinds of places, right? In the matan, what does he do? He puts it in a general sense, and there's a merit to that, as we'll see in a second. Al-mukallaf, the morally responsible person, right? Because dun al-mukallaf, a child, right? Or, someone or other, there's an excuse. Children, when they reach the age of discernment, they're encouraged not to do so. Yeah, the same principles. 7 years, before 7, there's general encouragement. From 7, specific encouragement. By 10, they're expected to do to act like adults when it comes to the limits of the Sharia. Right? And the one who does so deliberately, because someone who didn't realize, you're just walking and you're lowering your gaze, and you pass by somebody, right in front of somebody, that's not ta'ammud. لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم لو يعلم المار بين يدي المصلي ماذا عليه لكان أن يقف 40 خيرا له من يمر بين يديه. If the one who passes بين يدي المصلي, right in front of the one praying, and that's legally understood within موضع السجود, what is against them? Meaning, right, of sin, and that's mentioned in some of the secondary narrations, right? For them to wait for 40 would be better for them. لكان أن يقف 40 خيرا له من يمر بين يديه. Were they to wait 40 would be better for them than to pass right in front of them. This is مبالغة. وفي رواه الشيخان وفي رواية البزار 40 خريفا. In the narration of Bazar, 40 years, right? It can refer also to seasons, right? But the zahir is that it's years. Although but that narration, there's ikhtilaf about it, etc. 40, right? But if it's 40 years, it's like mubalagha. You're not expected to wait 40 years, right? This is lil mubalagha. That if they consider the gravity of the sin, right, passing right in front of them, this is when there's no excuse. Because bayna yadayhi, all you have to do is to walk around. If they have a sutra, go past the sutra. If they don't have a sutra, go past the place of prostration. It'd be better to go around if you could. Right? So someone's praying, I could go past their sutra or I could go behind them, then it would be better to go behind them, but I have a right to go past the sutra too. Now, if they left the sutra in a busy place, then some of the fuqaha said they have no hurma. You could walk right in front of them. But the men rather think go past their place of sujood, right? Because the sutra is mustahabba, and we'll look at the ahkam of the sutra when we come to them. Right? وَالْمَكْرُوهَ الْمُرُورِ بِمَحَلِّ السُّجُودِ. And what's disliked is to pass by the place of prostration. عَلَى الْأَصَحِ, according to the sounder of two opinions. Right? And the محل السجود is defined by Imam Tahtawi quoting Fakhr al-Islam. And Fakhr al-Islam, who is Fakhr al-Islam? Yeah. Right? It's where the gaze of the one praying properly, the salat of the khashi'een, so you're looking at the place of prostration, that's and this applies across the board. Right? And you see, someone inquired about the importance of the hidayah. You see, where does the madhab revolve around? If you see in the commentary, كما في العناية, as mentioned in the عناية of Imam Akmal al-Din al-Babarti, وصححه في النهاية, the nihaya from the commentaries on the hidayah. قال المحقق في الفتح, Ibn al-Humam said in Fath al-Qadir. What is that? Commentary on the hidayah. That's what the madhab revolves around, right? Right? But none of them encompassed everything of the hidayah. The hidayah, there's a reason it took 11 years to write. And that's why so much was written on the hidayah, yet so much kept getting written on the hidayah. It is, many have argued, one of the greatest books of Islamic scholarship, right? What is more brilliant, the Hidayah or Fath al-Qadir? People who get it would say the Hidayah. Fath al-Qadir is explaining it out, but it's explaining out what's there in the Hidayah. And nothing compares. The Ikhtiyar doesn't compare to it. Sharh al-Wiqaya doesn't compare to it. Right? Abu al-Hasan Ali Nadwi mentions about the Hidayah that some of the ulama said that the books of adab, the great books of Islamic, the most eloquent of the literature of the Islamic age is four. If you said you had to choose 4 books, the Hidayah would be one of them, right? Some say it would be the Hidayah of al-Marghinani and the Ihya of al-Ghazali and the writings of Abu Hayyan al-Tawhidi, just because of their eloquence. And others mentioned, other for number 4, right? And of course that's a nisbi matter, but insofar as that eloquence, balagha, is ada'ul maqsood bi awfal al-alfaz, is to convey what is meant to be conveyed with the most fitting of words. Anyways, right? This is في المسجد الكبير والصحراء وفي الصغير مطلقا, right? In a large masjid or in the open place. Why? In a large masjid, if someone is praying. So the simple way of dabt of the mas'ala, and which can just give a fatwa muttarida, and that's mentioned from at-Tumurtashi, is you go past the mawdi' al-sujud, and that's it. That's what's sinful. The adab then would be where it is easy to go around, it's recommended to go around. Right? Which would be either to go from behind, or if there is a sutra, beyond the sutra, etc. وفي الصغير مطلقا, right? In a small place, مطلقا أي يكره المرور مطلقا, right? That it's disliked to right? وفي الصغير مطلقا, that in a small place, now this is إجمال of عبارة, in a small place مطلقا, that المكروه, it's مكروه مطلقا, this عبارة needs unpacking, right? That وبما دون قامة يصلي عليها لا فيما وراء ذلك, right? Or less than دون قامة يصلي عليها لا فيما وراء ذلك, not in that which is beyond that, في شارع, on the street for example, لما فيه من التضييق على المارة, because otherwise it is, because beyond that would make it difficult for the people praying, right? Duna qama, just half. So the qama is less, the qama is the height of a person, that's less than mawdi' sujud, because if someone's praying on the street or a path, just avoid walking right in front of them. But you could walk a little closer to mahall sujud, meaning if needed, right? But broadly, you can take, this is, in the commentary he tries to piece together the various opinions. The matan makes an itlaq, kind of like what we've observed in Maulana Sahib al-Kanz. Okay. Now, التضييق على المارة مكروه, right? The Prophet said, you're not supposed to pray on a public pathway or anywhere. Where? Because that's شغل حق الغير. You don't have a right to pray there, right? Which is ممر الناس, right? Right? You pray on the side where you're not blocking other people. Then he mentioned something to connect this with ahkam al-raj'ah, right? And the basic thing is that the raj'ah in the Hanafi method, so the talaq, that's raj'i, the revocable talaq, the raj'ah can be sariha, which is by by the words used for raj'ah, raja'tuki, or arja'tuki, I have taken you back, right? Can also be dilalatan, also be effectively, which is بكل تصرف لا يكون إلا بين الزوجين, which is by that which can only be between two spouses, which is touching with desire or looking with desire, but looking with desire at that which you would only look at from your spouse, which a husband would look at from their spouse. So if this happened, this is the ruling. This, right? How? Husband's praying in the bedroom. A woman gets out of the bed and she was naked, and he looked at her private parts with desire while praying. This is the ruling. The raj'ah happens, it doesn't break the prayer, because it's a fara' of the issue of nazar. So if it happened, this is the ruling, right? And you also consider small houses, it being a habit of people to sleep without clothes on, which is, and the early times, that's one of the reasons why the adab of istidhan, there's the adab of seeking permission, because people would not have many clothes and they would take their clothes to go to sleep. They didn't have air conditioning and stuff, right? So وَلَا تَبْطُلُ صَلَاتُهُ بِنَظَرِهِ إِلَى فَرْجِ الْمُطَلَّقَ. One's prayer is not invalidated by looking at the private parts of the divorced woman. أو الأجنبية, or an unrelated woman. يعني فرجها الداخل, meaning the inner farj. Right? بشهوة, with desire. Right? With desire. Right? في المختار, meaning even if with desire. Right? Right? And desire, there's a very good definition of desire, right? Better than what's given by Imam al-Tahtawi. Right? حد الشهوة في أحكام النظر, right? It's summarized in the Hadiyah al-Ala'iyya, and it's summarized also in Nahlawi, and we could share that here. And it has to do with Ahkam al-Nadhar. You can see it there. There's a small treatise of Sheikh Abdul Ghani al-Nabulsi, printed in a set of 3 treatises, printed in a mediocre manner, but it's printed, available, inshallah, on tahqiq of the Hadd of Nadhar. Ibn Abidin and others took that as reliable, and it's good. But looking with desire is, so there's looking is not the haram thing, and the useful thing is that the difference between recognizing something as being, there's the istihsan is not, because broadly looking, right? If you see a beautiful flower, do you say this is beautiful? Well, not do you say it's beautiful, but if someone sees a beautiful flower, right? Do they desire the flower? No, it's just istihsan, beautiful. Right? So mutlaq al-istihsan is not shahwa. Now, in some situations, it needs intense desire, right? Which is that which causes an erection, etc. Right? And that has to do with like ahkam, certain rulings that relates to intense desire. But rulings related to permissibility or not of looking is neither just deeming something beautiful, right? So if someone's a teacher, and let's say someone's teaching English, right? And they find, students from a certain background beautiful, like so they're teaching in East Africa and they find East African women beautiful. Does it mean he can't look at them? No, they just, these are. So that is not shahwa. Istihsan is not shahwa, right? But also, intense desire is not what makes looking impermissible, right? It's the mailul qalb. It's the inclination towards the person that is, and you can get the specific definition from there. That would take us outside the scope here, but just to, right? Because this is amal qalil, so it'd be makruh, right? So if someone's praying and they know their spouse, their wife is coming out of the bed naked, then lower your gaze, close the gaze, don't look, because it's amal, but it's qalil, right? وَإِن ثَبَتَ بِهِ الرَّجْعَةِ, even if this would cause raj'a, right? He would be considered to have taken her back. وَلَوْ قَبَّلَهَا أَوْ لَمَسَهَا فَسَدَتْ صَلَاتُهُ, if he kissed her or touched her, with desire, it would break the prayer. لأنه في معنى الجماع, because that would be like intercourse. والجماع عمل كثير, and intercourse is excessive action, right? Right. So the lams that's mentioned, as Tahtawi points out, is lams bi shahwa, touching with desire, because that would be considered excessive action, right? Right. Right. أو لمسها, this is بشهوة, right? Right, as mentioned by Imam Tahtawi. These are theoretical issues. Some of it is, they mention rare issues like this. One, to help you connect chapters. Number two, to train you in the application of the principles. The principle is what is considered amal kathir and what is considered amal kathir qalil. ولو كانت تصلي فأولج بين فخذيها وإن لم تنزل أو قبلها ولو بدون شهوة أو لمسها بشهوة فسدت صلاتها. If, of course, it's not allowed, because you're not allowed to disturb someone praying. So this is, of course, min bab awla, right? Like if someone's praying, what's the ruling of? Giving the kiss on top of on their cheeks. You're not supposed to do it. So A40, this is just, so the fuqaha are okay, if this, then this, right? The fuqaha are not there to tell you to give you moral judgments, because they're obvious. If she was praying and someone inserted their penis between her thighs, even if they did not ejaculate, or kissed her even without desire, and that there is khilaf on, right? Fihi khilaf, right? Kissed her without desire, أو لمسها بشهوة, or touched her with desire, her prayer is invalidated. وإن قبلته, if she kissed him, ولم يشتهيها, and he did not feel desire as a result of that kiss. He's praying and he is standing there, right? He came up from ruku'ah and he's just standing there, and she kissed him on the forehead and he didn't feel desire from it. لم تفسد صلاته, his prayer is not invalidated, right? Right? And the ulama, anyways, there's discussion on that. You can read in Tahtawi. It's outside the scope. Okay. Then we have faslun fil makruhat, the disliked actions of the prayer. Right? Now, makruh has a general legal meaning. right? And in the Arabic language, al-makruh is ضد al-mahbub. This is the general meaning. He says al-makruh ضد al-mahbub. The makruh is the opposite of what is beloved. And why is it mentioned ضد al-mahbub? Because what's the conceptual opposite of the makruh? Is the mustahab. Mustahab is from habba, yuhibbu, fahuwa mahbub. Right? That's why he mentions, right? يعني ذكره لأنه ضد المستحب. Right? It's the opposite of what's recommended. The recommended is that which has been deemed pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? ما أحبه الشارع فحث عليه. Right? That's why the mustahab, يعني ما استحبه الشارع ما the lawgiver has deemed it to be good and pleasing, etc., etc., etc. Right? Right, so now he'll give us a nice summary of the makruh tahriman and the makruh tanzihan. Right? And this should be diagrammed. Right? This should be diagrammed. What's mentioned here by Imam Shurunbulali is very nice. And I would diagram that first before jumping into Tahtawi or anything like that. Right? So the makruh, right? Right? There's the makruh in itself. The makruh lughatan is ضد المحبوب. Shar'an, right? Then there's shar'an. He doesn't initially give us a definition of what is the makruh shar'an. Does he give us a definition? Does he? Go ahead. Ladies first.
I think that he doesn't give us the legal definition of.
Yeah. He gives us the ahkam, right? The hukum. And the fuqaha often don't give the definition اعتمادا على ايش؟ على that the hukum. Now logically الحكم على الشيء فرع عن تصوره. You have to first know what is something, then you give the hukum. And the hukum is الحكم هو الأثر المترتب على الشيء. Right? Is what is the consequence of something. But the fuqaha are amali. Right? Okay, we know what the makruh is. Makruh is what you shouldn't do. Right? Yani, so there's a definition of the makruh, right? Yani, right? Right? So the makruh relates to the nahi of the sharia, right? Right? So you have al-ma'murat wal-manhiyat. The al-ma'murat, right? Al-ma'mur إن كان المأمور به إذا كان على وجه اللزوم. Right? So the amr is either على وجه اللزوم or يعني the amr can be لازم or غير لازم. The amr that's لازم, the command that is incumbent, and that's the asl, or jazim, right? Jazim could be قطعي, and that's the fard, or غير قطعي, and that's the wajib. And then there's the amr that's غير لازم or غير جازم, and that's the sunnah, right? And then the sunnah, as we've seen, could be muakkada or mustahabba. Right? And there's some tafsil to it, right? Because the amr, or ما يفهم منه الطلب, right? So you say الطلب إن كان على وجه اللزوم, right? It's قطعي or ظني, فرض واجب, or the طلب ما طلب فعله, if it is مع التأكيد etc. it will be سنة مؤكدة or otherwise سنة مستحبة. Then you have ما طلب تركه, right? So the, right? If it's ما طلب تركه طلبا جازما or لازما, right? That way we're told to leave. Firmly, right? You know. Then if it's decisively established that we have to leave it, that's the haram. If it's يعني قطعا, if it's ظنا ما طلب تركه جزما بغير دليل القطعي, it is the مكروه تحريما. وما طلب تركه دون جزم, this would be the makruh tanzihan, etc. Now, navigationally, how do we tell whether something is makruh tahriman or tanzihan? One is don't, that's a hukum shar'i. So, can you just come up with your own hukum shar'i? No. So, al-marji'uhu ila al-fuqaha. What do the fuqaha say about this? But one of the facilitative indicators, there's a series of facilitative indicators. One of them is so كيف نميز, right? بين المكروه تحريما والمكروه, how do we distinguish between المكروه تحريما and المكروه تنزيها? Right? One is بالنظر إلى مقابله, to look at its opposite. That what are you leaving by it? Right? So for example, if we say, what is the ruling of ترك التسبيح ثلاثا في السجود? What is its ruling? How do you figure that out? What are you leaving? سنة مؤكدة. So it'd be مكروه تنزيها مع الإساءة. What is the ruling of leaving the Fatiha? You are leaving a wajib, right? So if you look at ترك الواجب يكره تحريما. ترك السنة المؤكدة, leaving the wajib, is مكروه تحريما. Leaving the sunnah المؤكدة is مكروه تنزيها with إساءة. Leaving, if something, now what is the ruling of leaving the sunnah mustahabba? What's the ruling of leaving the sunnah al-mustahabba? Leaving the sunnah muakkada, leaving the recommended sunnah, the sunnah mustahabba, is not makruh. And there's a very logical thing. What is the ruling of sending salawat on the Prophet ﷺ right now? It's recommended. What's the ruling of making tasbih right now? It's recommended. What's the ruling of reciting Quran right now? It's recommended. What is the ruling of paying attention to this class? Well, one of the arguments, like why shouldn't you make dhikr in class? Is because being silently attentive, if you're in the class, the ulama would say it's wajib or sunnah mu'akkada. If you don't want to be in the class, do something else. Right? Right? But if there's something makruh, but that makruh is makruh because you're leaving a mustahab, then that makruh would be what? Would be makruh tanzihan, because you're leaving something mustahab. Right? Right? So bin-nadhar, so one way is to look at bin-nadhar ila muqabilihi, to look at what is its opposite. The other is bin-nadhar ila ma'nahu, is to look at its meaning. Right? Like what made this disliked? So for example, if you touched your nose in prayer, what's the ruling? The general ruling. It's makruh. But if you look at the meaning, what is the meaning that makes touching your nose disliked? It's amal qaleel. But what if you decide to, if I'm praying, while praying, I decided to make braids with my beard? I'll need a brush because it starts hurting. Start braiding my beard. Is this amal kathir? I'm praying. You say, Sabbih isma rabbika al-a'la, etc., etc. I keep going. What is this considered? What's the ruling of braiding my beard without amal kathir? It's makruh. What is the karaha? If you look at the ma'na, what is the underlying meaning? It's abath. And what is abath? It's makruh tahriman. And yusalli hasir al-ra's, to pray with your head uncovered. You could look at the muqabil, the opposite. Praying with your head covered for men is recommended. So if praying hasir al-ra's is disliked, it would be makruh tanzihan. But what are you leaving? You're leaving an adab. Leaving an adab, if they mention it's makruh, it would be makruh tanzihan or khilaf al-awla. Right? Just like makruh tanzihan. Right? So these are two practical ways. An-nadhar ila al-muqabil, an-nadhar ila al-ma'na. The third is to look at quwwat al-dalil. Right? Quwwat dalil al-mana'. What kind of dalil is it? And that's harder. Right? And to be fair, there are a few things that Imam al-Tahtawi says is makruh tahriman, and they're contested. And we don't want to go too much into that, but the ulama after Imam Tahtawi, and some of the later scholars make some of these a little stricter than they are, possibly. And it's caution. Don't do it. Simple as that. Right? But there would be some discussion on that, so we'll discuss that. But to be fair, Imam Tahtawi does a brilliant job in the sense that he defines a lot of these extensively. Okay. One of the wisdoms, why don't the ulama just list what's makruh tahriman and tanzihan in just its order? Like, imagine if you're teaching your child, okay, if please only use the toilet, but if you say, okay, if you pick your nose in front of strangers, it's this bad. And if you pick your nose when you're alone, it's this bad. Right? Is that how you teach proper manners? Would you have learned manners that way? No. You just said don't pick your nose. Right? 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 So when there's makruh, said these are things for you not to do. Right? And tariq al-amal is just to leave all of them. Wa khalas. But tafaqquh requires appreciating the differences, but also practically, sometimes we don't split hairs, just avoid all these things. Okay. Now, there are a few other dawabit that before we go into the chapter, right? They say that al-makruh fi al-hadr wal-ibaha, right? When it comes to, right? Is makruh when it comes to matters of halal and haram, the asl is that it is tahriman. Right? Right? And they use it frequently. So if they say, yukrah lirrajul lubs al-harir, for example, what do they mean? Tahriman. That has to do with halal and haram. But it's tricky that what is bab al-halal wal-haram, and because they also say al-makruh fil adab wal-hayat. The makruh when it comes to proper manners and forms is lit-tanzih. And if you have Riyadh al-Salihin, you can look in Riyadh al-Salihin. Kitab al-Adab, Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam an at-tana'ul qa'iman. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam forbade putting on your na'al, your sandals, standing. There's nahi anil akl bil yasar. What's the ruling of eating with the left hand? Makruh tanzihan. There's nahi anil shurb bil yasar. Tanzihan. Because all of that returns to mukhalafat al-adab. Naha Rasulullah, there's nahi against drinking while standing. It's either, if we say there's karaha in drinking while standing, it's tanzihan. Because tata'allaq bil adab wal hiyat, proper manners and forms. So distinguishing between what is halal and haram, hadr wal ibaha, and what's adab is subtle. So you need to be careful about that. And people fall into errant reasoning there. Sometimes looking at several of these considerations together. But these are subtle matters. Don't give yourself a fatwa. Sometimes we say, well, thinking about it, is it this way? But then you go either look for the nusus and confirm with reliable teachers, or ask reliable teachers. But as tulab ilm, and now you say, biddak, we work a little bit. Okay, that's a little bit about this bab al-makruh. So he tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala, we'll just read the opening. Al-makruh diddul mahbub. The dislike is the opposite of what is beloved. And there's a subtle meaning here as well, right? And the ulama chose the word mustahab, right? That there's tariq ahl al-yamin, which is al-iltizam bil-amr, right? The way of the people of the right hand is just to do what's commanded. But لا يزال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنوافل حتى أحبه. My servant continues drawing close to me by extra works until I love them. Right? So the mustahabbat are nawafil, they're extra. This is what's done طلبا للحب. Right? So that's why I say that في شرع الحب ليس ثم إلا فعل وترك. Right? In the way of love, there are only two commands: do and desist. Right? And there's a beautiful discussion in Sheikh Ibrahim Silqini's work in Usul al-Fiqh near the beginning, when he talks about the hukum, that there's the ahkam al-shar'iyya, but in mahabba there's fi'l wa tark. كل ما قال طلب المحبوب فعله فيفعله المحب وما أشار إلى تركه فيتركه بقدر وسعه. Right? And that's pointed to that يعني the mustahab is ما يحبه الله لكن لم يلزمنا به, and the makruh is ما يكرهه الله لكن لم يعني لم يترتب عليه إثم, and this is what you'll be punished for. Right? 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 So if someone, like some kid has a bad habit of picking their nose, if you leave the mucus, if you put the mucus on the fridge, you'll be punished. So he just flicks it on the ground instead. Says no. And the parent says, I'll only punish you for things I've told you are punishable. That's still bad manner. You're still displeasing your parent. Right? Don't get bad ideas. Right? But same thing. Okay. المكروه ضد المحبوب وما كان النهي فيه ظنيا كراهته تحريمية. Anything whose prohibition, right, is non-decisive, ظني, its karaha is prohibitively disliked. This is where there is حقيقة النهي in it, right? يعني there is actual prohibition, right? ولا صارف, right? And there's nothing that takes that prohibition from being prohibitive to being just of just avoiding. Right? Because the asl is that there is a nahi, is that it will be the nahi tufid al-mana'. Right? Illa li sarif, unless there's something that takes it out of being karahat tahrim. Right? Illa li sarif. Right? Right? Unless there's something to take it out, the sarif would be that we know that the muqabil, like the things that we've mentioned, the muqabil is a sunnah or is a mustahab, or the meaning is that fihi tarku adab, for example, etc. وإن لم يكن الدليل نهيا بل كان مفيدا للترك الغير الجازم, and if the proof is not of prohibiting, but rather it indicates leaving the matter without and without it being a firm command to leave, غير جازم, فهي تنزيهية. Right? That's like the principle النهي إن تعلق بالآداب والهيئات كان للتنزيه. Right? الأمر إن تعلق بالآداب والهيئات كان للاستحباب. A prohibition if it relates to proper manners. Right? It's of tanzih. But tanzih is not a small thing. Right? والمكروه تنزيها إلى الحل أقرب. Legally, the somewhat disliked is closer to being permitted. i.e. إلى الحل أقرب منه إلى الحرام. It's closer to being permissible than it being impermissible. And that has consequences. That if someone's doing something makruh tanzihan, do you have to correct them? Is it closer for you to correct them or just to let them be? What is it closer to? To letting them be. Because it's إلى الحل أقرب. Right? It's just the somewhat disliked. And there's some discussion, right? That Because the makruh tanzihan, when it relates to the rights of others, for example, or the limits, it's much more serious than when it relates to adab. The adab al-amma. So this is a matter where there's a lot of discussion, but just it's good to be aware, to be able to get a sense of the, because, like, for example, if Sister Zubaydah is visiting her friend Saadiya, and there's this fancy cheesecake, and you don't know, and you think she'll be fine with it, but you're not sure. You have a little bit of doubt. It'd be makruh to eat it. You're reasonably sure, but there's an element of doubt. When it relates to the rights of others, the karaha is more intense. The things that relate to huquq. Vis-a-vis, you're eating with 3 fingers or 4 fingers. Right? It's makruh to eat with your whole hand, unless that's the aada. Right? So in Jordan, they eat mensaf with the whole hand. Right? I don't know if they do that in Syria, but in Jordan, when they eat the mensaf baladi, with the jamid and everything, they eat it with the whole hand. So there's a Bedouin, a righteous Bedouin man, Hajj Kamal, he was telling one of the Westerners who's eating mensaf with a spoon, says, eat with the hand, it's sunnah. So I knew Hajj Kamal well. So I said, Sayyidi, is it sunnah to eat with the whole hand? He said, sunnatul mensaf. He said, sunnah of the mensaf. So what do you mean? He says, didn't the fuqaha? I said, I know what the fuqaha said. He's a learned Bedouin. He said, but if they ate mensaf, they'd eat it with the whole hand. It cannot be eaten other than this. And there's a leeway. I actually spent a lot of soul searching about mensaf because I liked it a lot. Should you eat it with the whole? I never ate it with the whole hand. I just couldn't get myself to. But, right? But that, you're leaving an adab. So the karaha is akhaf. Right? So this, these are just guiding principles. Right? وَالْمَكْرُوهُ تَحْرِيمًا إِلَى الْحُرْمَةِ أَقْرَبُ. And the makruh tahriman is closer to being haram, and in bab al-halal wal-haram, it's like the haram. So that's in general. Now, with respect to the prayer, وَتُعَادُ الصَّلَاةُ مَعَ كَوْنِهَا صَحِيحَةً لِتَرْكِ وَاجِبٍ وُجُوبًا. A prayer is repeated despite being valid for leaving a wajib. And it's wajib to leave a prayer in which one left the wajib, even though the prayer is valid. وَتُعَادُ اسْتِحْبَابًا بِتَرْكِ غَيْرِهِ. And it's recommended to repeat the prayer if you left other than the wajib. Right? The sunnah, etc. To lift the karaha. But this is إِن لَمْ يَكُونْ عَلَى سَبِيلِ الْوَسْوَسَةِ. This is if it's not out of waswasa. Right? Right? And he'll explain that, right? He'll explain that in a moment, right? Not out of waswasa, and if إِن لَمْ يكن على سبيل الوسوسة ولم يشغله عما هو أولى ولم يثقل عليه, right? If it's not out of waswasa, it doesn't busy you from what's more important. كحق الغير. You're at work, you have to get back to work. Contractually, you have to do your work. So you repeat dhuhr prayer 4 times to get it just right, and you're late getting back to your shift, that's haram. Or it becomes heavy. وَلَنْ يُشَادَّ دِينَ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا غَلَبَ. No one makes the religion difficult except that it'll overcome them. Right? قَالَ فِي التَّجْنِيس. And this is one of the later works of Imam al-Marghinani. It's noteworthy that it's after the hidayah. Right? So what's in the tajnis, if there's ikhtilaf between the hidayah and the tajnis, the last opinion of al-Marghinani, it's what's in the tajnis. قال في التجنيس. And this matter, the narrations in the madhab are 2. استحباب الإعادة ووجوب الإعادة. It's recommended to repeat a prayer in which you left a wajib or did a makruh tahriman, and another that it's wajib to repeat a prayer in which you left a wajib or a makruh tahriman. And a number of the ulama resolved the khilaf and they chose that it's wajib. So he says, قال في التجنيس أي قال شيخ الإسلام الإمام المرغيناني صاحب الهداية في التجنيس: كل صلاة أديت مع الكراهة فإنها تعاد لا على وجه الكراهة. Right? Every prayer performed with karaha, meaning التحريمية, is repeated, meaning right? Repeated in a manner that is not makruh. Right? Meaning you don't do it in a makruh time, etc. But then there's an ishkal. If you have to repeat the prayer, how do you deal with the words of the Prophet? وَقَوْلُهُ. So this is جواب عن سؤال مقدر, an answer to an implicit question. إذا قلتم هذا فما قولكم في قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. يعني, so he explains it. This is an answer to an implicit objection. Right? وقوله عليه الصلاة والسلام, and the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم saying, لا يصلى بعد صلاة مثلها, one does not pray after a prayer with the like of it. تأويله النهي عن الإعادة بسبب الوسوسة. It is explained in a number of ways. One is that you do not repeat the prayer out of waswasa, just to be sure. Right? فلا يتناول, say على سبيل الوسوسة, right? أو الإشغال عن الأهم, right? أو in أدى, and that's usually like related with wasa, إلى الاستثقال, right? Right? إن هذا الدين متين فأوغلوا فيه برفق. Right? This religion's deep, so enter its depths gradually. So you don't teach people that. If you left anything recommended, repeat the prayer. Most people leave some recommended things. They learn a little bit, they spend their whole lifetime repeating prayers, and what happens? They don't do their qada, because they're repeating the sunnah غير المؤكدة of Asr. Right? Right? And then they find religion difficult. فلا يتناول الإعادة بسبب الكراهية. So this hadith does not encompass repeating due to there being dislike. ذكره صدر الإسلام البزدوي. This mentioned by البزدوي في الجامع الصغير. الجامع الصغير, when they say so and so mentioned الجامع الصغير, this meant في شرحه على الجامع الصغير, in his commentary on الجامع الصغير. Because الجامع الصغير is by Imam Muhammad al-Hasan, and this very often they mention, about books that are known to be of Imam Muhammad al-Hasan, particularly الجامع الصغير. They mention قال قاضي خان في الجامع الصغير في شرحه على الجامع الصغير. Shorthand. We have to be careful. And then he tells us the 70 odd makruhs. Well, how many are there? 77. But I just wanted to give this muqaddimah first. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Any questions before we close?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I have a question from a previous class about
Bismillah.
Okay. So when we were reading on ما يفسد الصلاة, one of it was وَكُنْتَ تُمُرُّنِي عَلَى الرُّكُوعِ وَالسُّجُودِ. And if I understood correctly, you mentioned that القيام ركن زائد قابل للسقوط. I didn't understand that well. How can القيام be ركن زائد?
No, the rukn zaid is ما يسقط عند العذر, right? Because there's some things that are only lifted عند الضرورة, like قراءة, and it's a subtle thing. But rukn zaid, that, in the nafil, you don't have to stand, etc. So it is a rukn. But what is required for it to be lifted is easier than what is required to lift. Now what about qira'ah? But the qira'ah, the follower is effectively reciting, because qira'atul imam qira'atun lah. right? So that's just tadqiq that the ulama did. Right? Any other questions?
Sayyidi, when we talked about the issue of reading from the Mus'haf as invalidating the prayer, so I went through Tahtawi a little bit, and just to clarify. So he mentions two conditions or two reasons why Imam Abu Hanifa said that the qira'ah min al-Mus'haf was invalidated of the prayer, and then he also mentions the Imamain's position. So according to them, there are a couple reasons why it would be makruh. If those conditions were not found, could one?
But it's still amal, so there's still karaha.
So if they're huffaz firstly, and then
but they're only huffaz. See, they're only huffaz if they've got hifz. They don't have hifz, because if they have hifz, they don't need the mushaf. If they don't, right? So that just the Hanafis, and that's why the Hanafis ran the world in terms of qada and fatwa, right? They just said, look, if you're a hafiz, learn the Quran. If you can't, we'll ban you from leading in Taraweeh, right? We just said the rules. If there's enough of the imams of the masajid can't do khatam, we'll ban doing khatam in the masajid unless someone can be a certified hafiz, right? And that's why the Ottomans religiously, things ran well because they put standards, right? So that's the solution, right? People aren't gonna get like a dispensation from me on that one, right? Like people I don't like creating fitness. I'm not going to make stern public declarations or anything, but that the way people if someone makes more than a couple of errors in a whole 20 rak'ahs of Taraweeh, they should just excuse themselves, right? They should say, I can't lead Taraweeh, right? Because it's qillat adab ma'a kitabillah, right? If someone is a hafiz, they have to rearrange their priorities and get their hifz down properly. Otherwise, read a little bit of Quran. Nothing of the Quran is a little. That's why they said you shouldn't say أقرأ قليلا من القرآن, because لا شيء من القرآن قليل. Right? They say يعني ما تيسر من القرآن. That's the Quranic, right? There's a wonderful work. I'd recommend anybody to read it. Basically, anything that was authored by Sheikh Abdullah Sirajuddin, we should strive to read it. And they're precious things. They're easy reads, and they're deeply inspiring. He has several books on the Quran al-Kareem, and they drip with love, and they drip with wisdom, they drip with prophetic guidance, right? And the Salaf used to dislike saying احفظ قليلا, اليسير, الحفظ اليسير, القراءة اليسيرة, right? I have nothing further to say on it. I don't see any, the fatwa in the Hanafi madhab is not on the position of the Sahibain. And it opens doors for people being even more slack than the general thing with respect to that.
What if they're not leading the prayer, but they're correcting?
That's even worse. Then their prayer is invalidated for sure.
If they're hafal and they're using the mushaf to correct.
Why? Because then you are reading in the prayer. That's ashadd al-karaha. Like, what are we, like we're constructing a new religion for ourselves?
But that's not qiyah. If isn't reading different.
It's makruh. Reading a statement once is makruh, right? Is yukrah, like to look up and read something. Following along reading is amal mustamir, that's abath. Or fi hukm al-abath, It's really serious. One, you're holding on to something in the prayer, right? What would be the ruling of me holding my phone in the prayer? Right? It's makruh. It's not min a'mal. يعني إن صلاتنا هذه لا قوموا لله قانتين الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون. This is not min a'mal as-salah. That's why it's called the tahrima. Anything that's not of the actions of the prayer is not allowed in the prayer. I'm answering as a Hanafi. Is there khilaf? There is. But even in other schools, the Shafi'is were like Sheikh al-Buti. Every Ramadan, he would warn people, beware. This is unbecoming of the Book of Allah. What do you do with it when you go into ruku'? Right? Right? If you put it in your pocket, that's amal. If you put it against your knee, that's bad adab. What do you do with it when you go into sujood? Right? So إثبات الصحة لا يقتضي نفي الكراهية. Saying something is valid does not mean it's not makruh. Right? Yeah, there's short-sighted answers to the contrary. لست عليهم, the Prophet ﷺ told, لست عليهم بمسيطر. You're not there to control them. Right? And people will do what they choose to do, and we're not there to run the world, but it's really serious. And هذا يعني it's a mafsada, right? Sheikh Krayyim Rajih, who's Shafi'i, Mufti, he said, look, someone's a hafiz, man qara al-khamsa lan yansa. That's like, but you repeat the Quran until you have thabat. Many of the Hanafi scholars in Damascus say, even if Nisyan al-Quran, the Hanafis are very expansive, al-khuruj min al-khilaf mustahab. He said, but a hafiz should hold themselves to the Shafi'i opinion, practically. Right? It's not, the Hanafi opinion is the Hanafi opinion, it remains. But try to follow the Shafi'i opinion on that. And that's the way, what is the way of, they say, what is mujahadat al-nafs? You get the haram and makruh out from your practice in your own madhab, then learn another madhab and take the haram and makruh out of that, according to that madhab, without doing anything haram or makruh in your madhab, or leaving any sunnah in your madhab. Right? So I know multiple Hanafi, Shafi'i scholars who'd read both the commentaries on who'd read the Hadiyah al-Ala'iyya, and who'd read Nahlawi, and who'd read the Tariq al-Muhammadiyya, and both commentaries, even though they're Shafi'i, to try to get all the makruh according to Hanafis out of their life. I know Hanafi scholars who'd read al-Zawajir an ikhtiraf al-Kaba'ir of Ibn Hajar, even though they're Hanafi, to get rid of the makruh according to the Shafi'i school. And then also, there's the Hanabila have the Manzumat al-Kaba'ir and so on, and they'd get those things out as well. Right? Right? As one of the Indian muftis used to say, هذا الذي عندي والذي عند غيري قد يكون أولى وأقرب وأوفق. That's the world. We're not there to run the world, but it's very serious, right? Right. Right. It was up to me. Any place there's multiple errors, the administration should just tell the person, please read what you know. If you don't know it, don't read it. Simple as that, right? And in general, فعل يعني درء المفاسد مقدم على جلب المصالح. Right? Leaving mafasid is given precedence in the Sharia over seeking benefits. Especially when the benefit is the benefit of Taraweeh is to gather people. It's to people want to read the maslahah of Taraweeh is to pray 20 rak'ahs. The maslahah is to pray in congregation. If we can do khatam, yes, but it's only khatam if it's done properly. If we rush it, that's not al-khatm masnoon. If we do it with all these other things, then we should just say, okay, this year we can't do it. We got to get all our huffaz in order to take care of it. Right? Pay someone 3 months extra. Spend 3 months revising your recitation, because we don't want you to, disgrace the Book of Allah in Taraweeh. right? Many of the ulama say, like some of the places, right? And the standards of the deen are high, right? Right? The standards of the deen are high. I was dragged out of one of the masajid of Maidan by one of the ulama, because we're praying, because the imam of the masjid was leading somewhere else. This person came and he was reciting with bad tajweed. And he said, لا يسع العمر مثل هذا. Life is too short for things like this. And we walked from that masjid to Jami al-Hasan, and like, مثل ماذا سيدي? And he was shaking. Just the guy was reciting with slightly, not bad tajweed, just, you know, because there's, and that's just subtleties, forget. So, anyways. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
Just unrelated question online.
Okay.
If one is praying alone and not going to the masjid during COVID because of high-risk family members, is this allowed? Will that person lose out on the spiritual benefits of the masjid, and how should one compensate?
Could you say that again?
If one is praying alone and not going to the masjid during COVID because of high-risk family members, is this allowed? Will that person lose out on the spiritual benefits of the masjid? How should one compensate?
No, one makes the intention that had I been able to go, I would go. And we know that either the hadiths, and you can find them in the chapter of intention, that you know that if a person, either مرض العبد أو سافر, if a servant is sick or traveling, all that they used to do when they're healthy and able is written. And being sick or traveling are two examples of excuses. There's genuine excuse, you have the reward of what you would normally have done, and if you intend to do it, and actions are by their intentions. Each person shall have whatever they intended. You have the sincere intention. You don't just slack off and say, oh, I have a good excuse. And the sign that your sincerity, do you feel relieved that you don't have to do it? Or do you feel regret of not being able to do it? The sign of intention is regret of not being able to do it, with hope and certitude in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد